warm welcome to the show. This is Direct Talk, and I'm Abel Tsagab hosting the show. The Tigray Interim Regional Administration declared a 3-day national mourning parade in the memory of fighters who lost their lives fighting against Ethiopian, Eritrean, as well as Amhara forces during the war in Tigray. For more on this, I'm joined by Martin Plaut. He is an author and he specializes on conflicts in the Horn of Africa. Martin, thank you so much for joining us. Okay, Martin, what can you say about the veterans who lost their lives during the war in Tigray?
Obviously, they fought with extraordinary tenacity and bravery. And, they gave everything that they possibly could to their country and to their people. And of course, they deserve our respect and the respect of their people for what they have sacrificed. And it's just such a tragedy that they're having to now, bury people, or at least hold ceremonies for them, even if they were actually buried at the battlefields where they fell. This must be a moment of absolute heartbreaking, commemoration for their families, for their communities. But at least it does give some sense of closure. That at least they can now mourn openly. They know exactly who died, who didn't die, what happened to them. And I hope that that is something that they can at least heal in some small way. After all, they've lost young men, young women, and not such young men and women, in the struggle for survival.
What other choices were there for the veterans other than joining the ranks of the Tigrayan forces?
Well, of course, I'm sure that there were some people who didn't join. I'm sure there were some people who left the country, and when they could, because there was a time when people could actually leave and cross into Sudan, and a few thousand managed to get across there, but then the road there was blocked. And of course, I'm sure that some people escaped, and went to Addis Ababa or other towns in Ethiopia where they managed to survive, which must have been difficult. But clearly, the vast majority of the people of Tigray rallied to the cause of the government and of the people, and the differences that there were between the various political parties in Tigray were put aside, and it was a fight for survival. So I think for most people there was really little choice.
What do you think was the main reason that led the Tigrayan youth join the Tigrayan forces?
Well, it was simple. Their country was invaded. They didn't. What else could they do? I mean, when people arrive at your door with guns and they attack you from the air and with artillery, and they threatening to rape your sister, your mother. And there were even men that were raped as well. I mean, what on earth can you do? You have absolutely no choice, really, in those circumstances, but to either flee or defend yourself. And I think most people decided they would take the latter option, and they would fight.
Martin, do you think the fighters achieved their goals?
Well, I mean, let's be honest about what happened. In 2 years, things went in one direction and then another. But in the end, it was pretty clear that Tigray had to settle. It wasn't a victory. Unlike previous wars that Tigray and Ethiopia have fought, which did end in victory, this was not a victory, which is why they had to accept the Pretoria Agreement, which has many problems with it, and I can't see that it's going to really be properly implemented. It's a way of surviving, and it was to the great credit of the the fighting spirit of the Tigrayan people that yes, they lost Mekelle once, but then they came back and forced the invaders out, and they were never able to recapture it, and that was an extraordinary achievement. So I think there's everything to be said for what they did, and nothing can take away from their extraordinary heroism. I mean, clearly there were some mistakes made. Was it right to try and break through to the east and try and get through? It looked like to Djibouti. Try and establish a line there. it didn't work, and I think a huge number of young people died, especially on the flat areas in eastern, beyond eastern Tigray. And then, of course, there was also that enormous invasion of Ethiopia, where they came pretty blooming close to being in a position to threaten Addis Ababa itself. And all the United Nations, all the international community began pulling their personnel out. And then, of course, there was the huge retreat. Now, was that a good use of your troops? Was it the right decision? It's not for me to say. I think it must have been incredibly difficult to make those choices, and I'm sure they were made after really serious consideration. But the price was enormous.
Martin, how about now?
Yeah, well, what about now? The problem really now is that it is with this strange Pretoria and Nairobi agreement that came about, because the real difficulty is you can't win at the negotiating table what you haven't won on the battlefield. And so what they achieved was a settlement, with which obviously was very necessary, because you just couldn't go on fighting, couldn't go on losing personnel the way you were. So it was necessary. I'm not criticizing in any way the decision to do it, but what was achieved, didn't involve the Eritreans, and they were clearly one of the major protagonists in this war. So where are they now? How far are they inside Tigray? How far are they particularly occupying Western Tigray? The Eritrean question is one question. The other question, of course, is what about the Amhara who took over Western Tigray? I mean, it did suggest that the settlement would go back to the constitutional order. Now, if that's the case, then Western Tigray belongs to Tigray. But how is that going to be enforced? Who's going to enforce it? I have no idea, and I don't think anybody else does.
Fighting stopped after the Ethiopian government and the TPLF signed a peace agreement in Pretoria in November last year. What can you say about the major developments after the signing of the cessation of hostilities agreement?
Well, I think there are two really substantial developments. One is that the small parties which did win some seats in the last election, and some of the other, some of the veterans groups are now concerned about the way in which Tigray is being governed, and have demonstrated or tried to demonstrate, and the demonstrations were banned, which was not something that one would expect from an administration that wants to hold itself to democratic standards. So that's one thing. So there is clearly a concern amongst the Tigrayan people. Look, I haven't been to Tigray recently. I can't speak from that perspective. But, you only have to look at it even from the outside. You can see that there are concerns, and the kind of absolute solid unity that there was during the war seems to have been it just isn't there in the same kind of way, and one wouldn't expect it. And the second thing, of course, is the question of food aid, which has been halted now for many months, because there was a diversion of aid by senior people inside the military, the Tigrayan military, and in the administration. And the World Food Programme and the USAID just said, until we sort this out, you're not getting any more. And that is terrible for the people, because they are now being, in a sense, almost held ransom by it. And people are dying. And I know it must be immensely, immensely difficult for them. So to my mind, those are the two big issues. I mean, the third one, which we can discuss separately if you want, is the relationship with Prime Minister Abiy, and that's the other big issue. But I just hope that the question of food aid can be overcome. Of course, it's not just with Tigray. The problems with the diversion of food aid was found across Ethiopia. But Tigray was the one that really sort of was held to account.
Martin, what do you think you left from the Pretoria Agreement? What should be done from the side of Tigray and the Ethiopian government?
Well, I mean, Getachew Reda is a very brilliant and capable leader, and I'm sure that he's using all his skills to try to find a resolution to the relationship. Because this is the big problem: is really where does Tigray fit within the Horn of Africa now? Because let's be honest, there were people who were saying that it should be an independent country at one time. Then there was ethnic federalism, which is entrenched in the constitution. Then there are the voices of Unitarianism, which are calling for one state, one Ethiopia, nothing else. And in a sense, the status of Tigray is still the biggest question. How is Tigray, like all the other parts of Ethiopia, how are you going to live together in one area? It's an extremely difficult issue to resolve, and let's not forget this is not unique in any shape, way, or form to Ethiopia or to Tigray. I mean, here in the United Kingdom, I mean, I'm speaking to you from London. When I arrived here in 1977 from South Africa, that's where I was born, there was one United Kingdom. That was finished. That's it. That was the lot. And yes, there was Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. Today, it's considered four nations: Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and England. And, that has gradually been developing, and Scotland could break away. All they have to do is vote for it. And they would, in a referendum, and they would get it. So, I'm afraid, despite the fact that Britain having existed for so many hundreds of years, it isn't resolved. Nothing is ever resolved like this. You could argue in the United States, you have tensions between the different states and the way they should relate to the federal constitution of the United States. So I'm afraid this is not a unique problem, but it is a difficult one, a very difficult one. And I can't tell you how. It's certainly not for me to tell anybody in the Horn of Africa how they should live with each other. The only thing I would hope is that they can find a way forward that is peaceful and democratic, and can become, as a result of discussion and negotiation and wise counsel. Because the depth of culture and history of the Horn of Africa is unsurpassed. It's one of the great treasures of the entire world, is the culture, the history, the religious background of Tigray and of Ethiopia as a whole. And I think everybody must be enormously respectful of that, and the things that have been achieved. I mean, like the Gerd Dam on the Nile. I mean, amazing. Despite the World Bank not giving any money, I mean, it was extraordinary what was achieved. So people can do a lot, but it does require careful negotiation and hopefully a peaceful outcome.
Martin, do you think the Pretoria Agreement will hold?
No, I don't. One of the things that I think was supposed to come out of it was the question of justice, and I'm afraid I think that is not going to happen. There's going to be Prime Minister Abiy made it absolutely clear that he was not going to allow the international community to investigate the human rights abuses that took place during the war and who was accountable for them. He never cooperated, and for the people who lost their loved ones, who were abused, raped. I've never seen images like I saw of, and you must know the ones I mean. I've never seen images like that before, and I'm afraid those people will not get justice. So I think that will not be. There's no way forward in that. It just cannot happen.
Finally, Martin, what should be the role of the international community to stop those who are trying to sabotage the hard-won peace agreement?
Well, it depends who you mean by the international community, because it isn't one organization, of course. Every nation in the international system has its own concerns. I mean, whether it's the United Arab Emirates who are trying to expand their role in the Horn, whether you have people like the United States who want to keep Ethiopia as a friend, but and not allow them to sort of go too close to the Russians or the Chinese. There isn't one answer to that question, and the United Nations tries to sort of keep the middle ground, but with no great success, I'm afraid. And the great failure really also was the African Union, which, despite the war happening on its own doorstep, said almost nothing about it. I mean, perhaps just for precisely that reason, although they did in the end help broker a deal which the Americans worked so hard to bring to fruition. But in the end, as one very famous British diplomat said, Britain has no permanent friends. It has permanent interests. And that is true of the United States, China, Russia, and Ethiopia.
Okay, Martin, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a great pleasure.